You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Shanghai, a city that never sleeps, probably because it's running on caffeine. With more than 9,000 coffee shops and counting, is among the most coffee-crazed city on the planet. Get this, a new coffee outlet opens every 8 hours. You can't even walk a block without bumping into a cafe, a coffee chain, or someone just holding a cup of joe. Which begs the question, how did the land of tea suddenly become obsessed with coffee? China's coffee story has gone from zero to espresso in just 2 decades. I'm Genevieve Woo, and joining me to spill the beans on how coffee conquered China is CNA Senior Correspondent Tan Yew Guan in Shanghai. Hey, Shanghai has more coffee shops than any city on earth. 9,000 and counting. What's this coffee gold rush? What's fueling it? Do they even have enough people to drink it, Yew Guan?
To be honest, I'm actually quite sensitive to caffeine, so this story was quite difficult for me. Too much coffee, giving me palpitations.
Bouncing off the
caffeine,
walls, were you?
Yeah, I was literally bouncing off the walls. But for this show, just for this show, I had to drink coffee, at least pretend to. Okay, but you know what? In Shanghai, I must say, I landed here about 2 years ago. Right. And I must say, I do feel very tempted to just go and grab a cup of latte every now and then. and frankly, the reason is because the coffee here is just very good and very cheap. It's really the result of the really highly competitive coffee sector here. If you're a coffee shop owner, if your coffee is only serviceable and you charge a pretty penny, you won't survive here. Really, you won't.
Mm-hmm.
And what's more, the fact that there's such competition here, if you're tired of simple, good coffee, there's a variety of flavors you can try. Coconut latte is the most famous one, right? But there's plenty of others. There are even those that come with the seasons. Winter, they have winter flavors, and then autumn, they have autumn flavors. So now we are between winter and autumn, so we got a choice of winter and autumn flavors. So this afternoon we were grabbing a coffee, and there was osmanthus flavored latte.
Okay, I'm getting thirsty right now. So is this part of the reason there's this big rush or this trying new tastes, new flavors, the varieties? Is that why people are rushing to try? So the coffee chains come up with these ideas?
There is a demand for interesting drinks, right? Despite the fact that the economy is not doing too well lately, right? Affordable luxury, you know what I mean? It's not necessary for life, but for some people at least. I know for some people it's a necessity, right? But at least it's something you can afford.
Which will get interesting that you say is affordable luxury. It's like what they call the lipstick effect, right? Even in times of recession, lipstick sales actually go up. You've seen this. It's so crazed right now. Some office lobbies in Shanghai have 4 coffee outlets in one lobby. Are people spending more time drinking coffee than working?
And this office lobby is basically just beside me. There's one Starbucks, 2 Manners, and one Luckin. I do not know why there are 2 Manner coffees in the same office lobby, really. I really don't understand why. But in a way, it tells you like how easy it is to get a cup of coffee.
So this coffee, is it a lifestyle? Is it like what Starbucks introduced as the third place, and that has like pretty much taken root in Shanghai, in China right now?
Yeah, it is pretty much. Starbucks basically brought this third place culture. Essentially what it means is that if you want to talk business with a friend, what do? You go to a cafe. You want to have a date, what do? You go to a cafe. It's just a nice place to have a drink. The coffee itself is really almost by the by. Yes, there's good coffee, but then a nice place also works, right? So in some ways, that is really how the likes of Starbucks is surviving, despite the fact that their coffee is more expensive than, say, Luckin and Manner and all the rest, because Starbucks has a nice place. Right.
So it has. So what you're saying is the Chinese have pretty much adapted to this culture of the third place. So that's what they're weaving coffee culture, cafes into their lifestyle.
If you watch the documentary in it, there's one segment where I took a walk around this area. And it just took me like 18 minutes or 1 kilometer walk, that's about 2,000 steps, to hit 20 cafes.
And is it well patronized though?
Pretty much, right? I mean, if you go to a Manor Coffee, you notice that poor girl behind the counter. She's always brewing a cup. It never stops because besides those people that go to the counter, there are those that take away, right? The Mai,
Yes.
the deliveries and all kind of stuff. So they are well patronized. But of course, I must say, I'm in one of the most prosperous parts of Shanghai. And Shanghai is one of the most prosperous cities in China.
Yeah.
One of our profiles mentioned it. It's the fact that besides first-tier cities like Shanghai, even third-tier cities having this cafe culture. And now the third-tier cities are like the new frontier for the coffee sector. Because it's like, it's almost like virgin territory, right? Them right now. Yeah.
Sure. And now the bigger cities they could be reaching saturation point.
Oh, yeah.
So the expansion naturally moves out to the second tier, third tier cities. Let's take a little step back. When did coffee stop being foreign? Right, in China, it's a land of tea, and start getting so local. Now it's moving from first tier to second tier to third tier cities. Back in the Communist Revolution after 1949, drinking coffee was frowned upon. It was like a Western decadent practice. So how did that switch?
In some ways, you got Starbucks to thank, right? I'm glad that you mentioned the Communist Revolution and all that, because in many ways, the story of coffee is the story of modern China. And then when you realize you come to China, at the turn of the millennium, they didn't have a coffee culture.
That's right.
And yet, now you look at it, the Chinese coffee chains have gone global. We have Luckin's in Singapore, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And many other places. And they're literally shaking up the market, right? You think about it, it's amazing. Like all the coffee culture in China is actually pretty young. Very young. And it all started, you could say it all started with Starbucks in 1999, right? When they first opened up their first store in Beijing. And then subsequently...
Which coincided with China entering the World Trade Organization, isn't it?
Indeed. It happened just before WTO.
That's right.
And then when WTO happened, right, when China ascended to the WTO, it became cheaper to import beans, it became cheaper to import coffee machines. They started like expanding. I think it was like 30 outlets within a year. But actually the coffee culture started much earlier. It was actually brought to China and was sold out of a dispensary. A British pharmacist that brought it in. And when he first sold it, because it was sold out of a dispensary, the locals called it a cough syrup because it was bitter. And it was sold out of a dispensary.
Was it marketed as a cough syrup?
No, it wasn't. So many locals called it a cough syrup. Some articles actually mistakenly said it was actually marketed as so. But it wasn't.
Right.
Actually, it was what the locals thought it was. But subsequently, there was this Chinese guy. He started his own brand in 1935.
That's right.
Right? Here in Shanghai, actually. The story is really fascinating. Because within 2 years after he opened in Shanghai, right, he was forced to move because of the Japanese invasion. He was moved into the international settlement, which was a bit more still peaceful then. His name was actually Zhang Baochun. So Zhang Bao, and when you anglicize it, it becomes Zhang Baochun. So it becomes CPC. So CPC was the brand, right? It was actually the first grocery and distribution company under Chinese ownership. This was in 1935. And of course, he was selling to those they call in local language, Kalei. Right? These are Chinese people who adopt a Western lifestyle and they have the means to do. And he himself was a Laokale because he was English educated. And during the Japanese occupation, he actually managed to keep his business running, surprisingly, in the international settlement. And so much so that when the war was over, he enjoyed a coffee boom. Right? But then the boom didn't last long because, as you mentioned, the Communist Revolution took place. And in 1950, after he returned to Shanghai from a business trip, he was actually arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Forget this, historical counter-revolutionary crimes. So you can imagine, just for selling coffee, And then he was released 3 years later. But then he was sentenced again to yet another 12 years. Now, this time the conviction was due to a private loan he provided to one of his former employees. So I think he was trying to get it back. But then the employee has become an official in a state-owned company by the time. So it really goes to show you the sign of the times. You cannot offend the wrong people during those times, right? Yeah. And after he was released, his story got even more fascinating. And these are stuff that I couldn't put in my documentary, really. Sure. I think it's great for a podcast because after he was released, the authorities in Yunnan, the times have changed. The authorities in Yunnan actually invited him to be a technical consultant, right? Because why? Because Yunnan was the only place in China that grew coffee,
Right.
right? And for the longest time, they don't grow good coffee. It was just bad coffee that nobody liked.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked him to come in. So at 72 years old, Zhang Baochun actually helped Yunnan produce China's own coffee and raise it to a standard whereby he could bring it back to Shanghai. So that was when I think about the story, I get goosebumps. So this guy is just amazing.
That Mr. Chang actually had a revival of fortunes when he was 72 years old. So what happened to him after that?
In a very dramatic stroke of fate, his office was completely burnt down in Yunnan, right?
What?
So the incident caused him to leave Yunnan, right? But then the thing is, whatever he did, right, did lay the foundation quite a bit, because the facility and the people he trained there ultimately became the largest domestic instant coffee producer and supplier in China to Nestle. Nestle was the first people, along with Maxwell House, to bring instant coffee into China. And that essentially kind of like planted the seeds for coffee before Starbucks came along. And this Zhang story didn't end there. He eventually moved to California, quite disappointed because his company's gone. But yet, according to his daughter-in-law, even at his old age, right, he told his daughter-in-law that he saved up $5,000 and intend to return to China once he saved up $7,000 to restart his coffee business. Unfortunately, he died of a stroke in 1992 without fulfilling his wish.
Okay. All right. So in 1992, Mr. Zhang passed on. But at that point, China still did not have a coffee culture.
Indeed, because when Zhang died in 1992, at that time, China was still in the instant coffee phase, right? Starbucks only entered in 1999. And only after China's ascension to the WTO did Starbucks really expanded in China. And it was only then that China really developed a coffee drinking culture, at least a coffee drinking culture in a cafe or from a cafe, right? And of course, that subsequently led to the rise of the local chains and then also their tech-driven operations. And in some ways, the rise of the local chains has very much everything to do with COVID as well, right? Because what happened is that during COVID, the likes of Starbucks with their brick and mortar operations, they couldn't open shop. But the likes of, or rather, even if they could, people didn't really want to go and have the danger of catching COVID. But the likes of Luckin and Coffee and Manor, because they had this takeaway business, they did very well during COVID. And because of COVID, they expanded even more. And so in a way, the story of coffee in China really mirrors the story of modern China, right? Or rather, you have the Communist Revolution that led to the downfall of the coffee culture. And then you have the opening up during Deng Xiaoping, which led to the instant coffee entering. And then you have the ascension to WTO, which led to the entry of Starbucks and huge expansion after that. And then, of course, the pivotal moment, COVID, which all of us suffered through, which led to the real expansion of these local players. And what's more, these local players, just like China's rise as a tech power, right? They were more than just coffee providers, right? They're essentially tech players, right? So I spoke to Matthew David. He's the managing director of Daxue Consulting, which has been studying the birth and the rise of homegrown coffee chains in China. And here's what he has to say.
The coffee market is really a good proxy to understand the changes of the Chinese economy and Chinese society. You would think it's product-driven, but in China it has been tech-driven. Luckin, when it started, was seen as a tech-driven company, even if it was in the coffee market, because of the app they developed, because of the couponing they developed, because of all the technology they had to acquire clients.
Now, he talked about Luckin Coffee. Now, about this Luckin Coffee, it's now the biggest coffee chain in China. The last count, 26,000 stores as of the second quarter of this year, 2025. Earlier, you talked about the coconut latte that sold 100 million cups when it launched. What's the secret sauce there? Is it the coconut or is it the app?
It's really a bit of both, right? Yeah, I don't know whether I can say this and get away with it. But to be honest, when it comes to coffee, right, Luckin is definitely the cheapest. It has its fans, right? But some of the more discerning people will say, oh, Luckin doesn't really have good coffee. I think the other chains have better coffee and all that. That's all arguable, to be honest. But without doubt, Luckin has the cheapest coffee. But what really allows Luckin to do so well is the fact that their app allows them to experiment. Because of their app, because you need to order through the app, okay? So if they roll out a new product, right, straight away they can tell whether this product is doing well or doing badly. Almost by the minute, like the management can have a meeting at 3 p.m. and they can have the latest figures at 2:59.
It's real-time data.
It's real-time data, right? So they know, hey, is this product doing well? And if it's not doing well, move on, next. It's very much almost like a Silicon Valley tech ethos, or rather. It's very much the tech ethos from Silicon Valley. It's move fast, break things, and in this case, fail fast and move on. And they can sell at a very cheap price, really thanks to huge economies of scale.
Right.
I spoke to a coffee bean provider. She imports beans for all these local chains. And she's saying that if you think that it's really lousy beans, it's just not, right? The reason why they can use good beans and still sell at such a low price is because they got negotiating power. They can negotiate the price, like really drive the price down because they're importing so much. And on top of that, they can roast their beans at huge quantities. And at these massive factories, which is why they have huge economies of scale. So these huge economies of scale essentially allows them to sell coffee at 990 yuan.
Yeah. And speaking of roasting, you visited one of the huge roasting factories, isn't it? It's just slightly outside Shanghai. What was your experience about that?
This place is called Kunshan, right? Would not have heard about. It's actually the beating heart, they call it, of China's coffee industry. They roast about 2/3 of China's coffee. It's enough to provide each person in China 2 cups of coffee every year, right? The reason why they manage to do so, even though they don't grow a single bean, is because China authorities, like many localities, they make huge and active efforts to grow industries and cluster a production chain in the area. And in Kunshan's case, they were gunning after the coffee industry, right? So what they did is they came out with this green channel for the importation of beans, because most of China's bean consumption is actually of imported beans. And thanks to this green channel, right, bringing imported beans take only half the time compared to other cities, right? And this helps the roasters cut their costs by almost 1/3, right? So that's a lot of cost savings, right? And of course, on top of that's the fact of the matter that Kunshan is also near Shanghai, which is one of the biggest coffee markets in China. So that really helps. And I was also there, and while I was there, I visited one of the biggest third-party contract roasters, right? Because you have those that roast for Starbucks, meaning to say Starbucks open their own factories there, so they roast for themselves. Luckin also have their own factories there. And then there are also those third-party roasters, which roast for the many other brands. And I've witnessed how these massive roasting factories maintain standards.
Which is then, of course, can contribute to selling coffee at 990 yuan a cup. Now, this price wars, at this price, $1.80 Sing, $1.40 USD, 990 yuan a cup. This kind of price is like, coffee is now like a public service. Is it even sustainable? The thing about China, they don't seem to do things half measures. Even, say, the EV industry, right? How many do they have right now? It's 129 EV brands, but analysts say that only about 5 of the current brands will be viable by 2030. Is coffee going to go the same way too?
As far as I can tell, and this has been verified by other interviews in other industries, when you do something in China, when you make something in China, you can really drive the price down, the cost down, because of this fantastic supply chain that you have here. So essentially, right, when these chains sell coffee, on top of that economies of scale you get from negotiating down the price of coffee by buying huge quantities and also roasting them at huge quantities, you also have the fact that your paper cup costs less. Everything costs less here because of the scale they make it, and also because it's very near. They don't have to import anything. They just put it on a lorry and send it over. They can drive the prices really down to like very low prices. And because of that, right, this coffee industry, a lady that I interviewed, she says that because of that, they are able to still make a profit. That said, it is the independent chains that are in trouble. We spoke to the owner of a company, and what that company does is it buys, sells, and rents second-hand catering equipment. And from his vantage point, he can see this trend in the coffee industry. His name is Liu Hongping. He's the general manager of Yuqing Catering Equipment. And this is what he has to say.
The coffee machines we're collecting now are mostly from those small independent owners in business for 7 to 8 years with many loyal customers. But since the price war started, they have been forced to lower prices too, to 1990 to 1290 yuan, from 3990 to 2990 yuan. However, their costs are higher. After paying rent and staff wages, they are left with nothing, just working hard for nothing in return.
China's known as the land of tea. How does its booming coffee culture sit alongside that proud tea tradition?
I'm really not much of a coffee connoisseur, partly because I'm really too sensitive to coffee to indulge in it very seriously. But one thing I realized diving into this story is that, hey, maybe I can do gourmet coffee, because according to the barista in the gourmet coffee place, she said that this gourmet coffee, what they do is they do so chong cafe, which means essentially pour over coffee, pour hot water over coffee. And it has much less caffeine than the typical Italian espresso, because the typical Italian espresso, not only is they roast it to a much higher temperature, and the way the coffee is made just exudes out a lot more caffeine than the way they drink gourmet coffee. So the way they drink gourmet coffee is the so chong cafe. And I visited this gourmet coffee shop, because I really wanted to know, seriously, how can you sell coffee at 20 times, Luckin's price and still survive? Because this coffee shop is just below my apartment. What I realized is that, so they're selling a kind of culture, really. Of course, I must say that they have a very good kaoshan. This gourmet coffee place actually is also somewhat has investors linked to the Yunnan authorities. And so they are also selling Yunnan beans as a single origin bean. But that said, they are definitely selling to rich Shanghainese that want a different kind of experience. And these are people who has money too. And I also realized that they are taking their cultural cues from the traditional tea culture, right? Because you see, when we drink tea, we talk about the mountain where it's grown, the harvest year. Those really expensive longjing cha, they can really cost a lot more than normal tea. But people still pay for them. Because in specialty coffee, they discuss things like bean variety, the blend, and also the processing methods, what temperature is processed at, and all kind of stuff. So in a way, they mirror each other. Because I understand from one of the cupping sessions that I witnessed, they said that the person told me that actually in China, they can roast the coffee slightly differently to cater to local taste, to make it a bit sweeter and all kind of stuff. So there are a lot of things you can do with the temperature and all that to make the coffee different.
And speaking of local taste, I'm going to jump in real quick. When I was in China and I tried Luckin Coffee, the one that I was recommended to by my crew is the one with Mao Tai in the coffee. Have you tried that? I'm like you, I'm not really a coffee drinker, but when I tried that, I was addicted. I had it every day, 4 or 5 times a day throughout my entire shoot. I just couldn't stop Luckin Coffee Mao Tai flavor. I'm not sure if it was the coffee or the Mao Tai that I was addicted to, but that's a different story. But yes, going back to that, localizing flavors, right? Mao Tai being, of course, the national alcohol of China, so to speak. And it's very signature. It's very fragrant. It's very aromatic. And on top of that, brewed with the coffee. It was an experience.
Precisely. In a way, you mentioned Mao Tai coffee. That's one of their hits from Luckin.
Yes, it is.
Right?
It is.
Aside from their
Coconut latte.
Yeah, the coconut latte. And the boss of that gourmet coffee place mentioned to me, he said that it's this cultural context, the Mao Tai, and the fact that China is a huge place. Coconut, you might think it's not Chinese, but you must remember they have Hainan Dao, they have Yunnan.
Exactly.
So they have so much to draw upon. To make their coffee and make it various flavors. Like, for example, the osmanthus one I was mentioning to you about. That's something that the area around Hangzhou is quite famous for.
Right.
Yeah. And he also mentioned the fact that China has 8 major cuisines, especially gourmet coffee, because it also has sour, bitter, right? And I mentioned earlier, if you tweak the temperature and all that, sweetness. So again, it mirrors the Chinese culinary culture and making experiments and all that to the coffee bean, right? So in some ways, you could say this new generation of Chinese with the means have really made this foreign object very much their own. And now watch out, it's coming to a coffee shop near you.
And on that note, coffee's rise in China says a lot about how fast the country's changing. It hasn't replaced tea, it's just joined the table. In every cup, you taste a mix of tradition, ambition, and a dash of caffeine-fueled confidence. Thanks for listening. May your brew be bold and your cue be short. I'm Genevieve Woo, and this episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast was brought to you by Clara Ong, Tiffany Ang, Nat Betavero, and me, Genevieve Woo. Bye for now.